John Summers is the motoring historian. He was a company car thrashing technology sales rep that turned into a fairly inept sports bike rider. Hailing from California, he collects cars and bikes built with plenty of cheap and fast, and not much reliable. On his show, he gets together with various co-hosts to talk about new and old cars, driving, motorbikes, motor racing, and motoring travel.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon. It is John Summers, the motoring historian. I always pause and clear my throat and then need to trim that bit out right before I start speaking, and then think afterwards, gosh, I've muffed yet another intro to one of these pods, and you know, one where I've got somebody else on, that other person leaps in, to mock me usually and, break up the flow. But left to my own devices, I do just ramble on completely, don't I? So this offering is a sum up and some thoughts around a presentation that I went to by these guys, Autoliv. That's how it's written, Autoliv. I'd never heard of them before. The guy sitting next to me, he'd never heard of them before either. But I guess about 50% of all of the passive safety devices in the cars around us, if you live, well, wherever you live, basically, Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, Russia, Japan, or America, about half the airbags are made by these Autoliv guys. Can't figure out how to pronounce it. Sorry. I mean, it's a nice presentation. Good, interesting thoughts. I don't mean to be dismissive by... it's like Hyundai. It's one of these where I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. And, they seem to have a corporate way of pronouncing it. Anyway, whatever. These guys make airbags. And the presenter was in the valley doing the usual thing where you're looking around, just trying to understand, well, is there something special about the valley? And if there is, what can we do with it? And that actually was one of the most insightful parts of the evening, where she talked about and the presenters was an engineer for these airbag company, and clearly rising star in that she's only about 10 years out of college, but clearly somebody the company has tapped to succeed, because they've sent her out to California here to see what is happening with startups, and that's a useful segue into how the whole thing got set up, and it speaks to that special Silicon Valley environment, and it's not the first of these kind of events that I've been to. The Hawkwind and LIDAR pod was another one of these kind of open evenings that I went to at a little sort of where it's called the Nordic Innovation House. So I don't know how it's funded or anything like that, but it's a little building conference space just right there in downtown Palo Alto. And I guess the event was hosted by a guy called Sven Beaker, who I have known for about 10 years now, because he was involved with Stanford right when I was first involved. He was leading the program that I was involved with and did work around, and the classes that I've been involved with as a TA at Stanford over the years have all came under Sven's remit initially. So similar sized audience to LIDAR, to the LIDAR crowd, and Sven's involvement is as the local representative of the Society of Automotive Engineers, and he did quite a funny little pitch for the Society of Automotive Engineers new website and the sort of encyclopedic function that they have for automotive research related topics. So it's called SEA Mobilus, and really it did seem like quite a good app. And he did a good little overview before handing over to the main presenter for the evening. Now, look, right, you might be surprised that I was interested in going to a presentation about safety. And I used to say with all of these things, know thine enemy. And then I realized that actually it's not really that, is it? Because nobody's like in favor of lots of people being killed and injured on the roads, are they? Nobody's in favor of that. But, nor am I the first person to be, I'm less of a safety first. I'm more of a, as MG would have it, safety fast. There's an old MG tagline. But I am interested in a new technology, and there is still an element of me that wants to understand, that feels I need to understand what's coming, because if you don't understand what's coming, I'm sitting here now looking at a pair of Jixers that are like in the sort of, recording studio spot with me. These things have there's never going to be anything remotely like that ever designed again. Because these things are legal, right? Jetpacks, flying suits when they come, if they're as unregulated as electric mountain bikes, stroke dirt bikes, stroke, aren't they really the same thing? If they're as unregulated as that space is now, perhaps, jetpacks and flying suits will give us a similar experience to those which motorcycles have given us in the 20th century. But we're moving away from that, and this safety blah symbolized, by this presentation, is part of that. So I want to sort of head that straight off at the pass. And, it's relevant. We've just had the 2024 presidential election literally a couple of days ago. So, this whole notion of freedom and what is a rational choice to make, what's a rational decision, what's a good decision, and does anybody else have the right to tell other people what to do? And just where those lines are, we're thinking about those things all the time, aren't they? And it's one of the things that as a European, when you first come to America and you realize that many Americans are adamantly anti-helmets. In fact, at a conference of historians, I met a fellow historian who was an avid motorcyclist, was strongly involved in the no helmet campaign, yet always rode with a helmet himself. It was like his personal choice. I strongly believe in personal choice. I personally want to wear a helmet, but all of these people who don't want to wear helmets, it's not like they don't know that you can fall off, stop your head, and that's it. The feeling of the wind in their hair is the reason why they rode motorcycles in the first place. That's such a so I'd never seen it from that point of view before. I'd always just thought they were bloody stupid idiots, and so in other words, ignorance leads you to jump to conclusions about this. And I was actually thinking about exactly that kind of thing when I've been looking at these Harley road glides recently. And the Harley road glide is the dude with the big plastic. So if you remember Chips and the Harley there, those guys, they had plastic on, which is what you need if you're going to do decent speeds on the highway and actually ride a long way. You can't, like a naked bike, that's hard work, isn't it? So the plastic of I think the model of Street Glide or whatever, the standard single headlight Harley, I guess when you steer, the plastic moves with the handlebars, so it makes it heavy. Whereas the road glide, that was an attempt to do something similar to what old, BMW or dare I say it, Honda with the Goldwing, what they were doing, where the plastic is fixed, so you get all the benefits of aero protection, but then you get lightweight because you're only steering the forks and all of that stuff rather than all of the plastic as well. So anyway, there's my little sidebar on Harleys. And I guess I always like the road glide because I have that sharp nose and the two headlights and all of that. have a cigarette lighter or cigar lighter, I guess, in the fascia of the bike. And I was looking at that thinking, what? Because if you're wearing a helmet, you can't smoke, can you? The assumption must be that either you're not wearing a helmet or you're wearing a pot helmet, right? It must be, right? Because no Harley rider's going to ride one of those, lift up face ones that you see some people ride in. That has to be the, and I just thought that was interesting, and it put me in mind of that story about world motorcycle racing champion and all around amusing gentleman Barry Sheen. Oh, Sheeny was such a committed cigarette smoker that one of, and you used to have to be on the grid ages before the race. He just desperately wanted a fag. So he had a hole drilled in the chin strap of his helmet so the cigarette could go through it, and he could be on the grid and, have his nicotine fix without needing to, and still be wearing the helmet and ready to go when the time came. So look, right, nobody in their right mind, if you could wear a full face helmet, why would anybody wear a pot helmet or no helmet at all? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would say to people about those open face helmets, I mean, I might not be the most handsome guy out there, but I do quite like my nose in the middle of my face and all of my teeth and my jaw. And I feel like if you're not wearing a full face helmet, you may not have those things. But, again, it's what that historian dude made me realize was that for some people, the wind in the hair is all. You take that away and you just as well be sitting, in the back seat of an SUV being driven by, a chauffeur, which is, of course, where we're going with this autonomy, right? And that's why I'm wanting to do this like little sort of positioning thing. And in the name of safety, we're going to move to the electronic nannies because, we can't be trusted, right? Just as 2001 A Space Odyssey. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't let you do that. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't let you ride that motorcycle. It's too dangerous, Dave. I'm sorry, Dave. Now, do you see why there is still an element of know thine enemy for me? Because there's an element there. There's still Ned Ludd in me, and he was, if you don't, those of you who are fortunate enough not to have to study 19th century industrial history of England won't maybe know who Ned Ludd was. He was a man who was so cross with industrialization. He led mobs and they smashed machines. Hate the machines, bash the machines. It's really quite beautiful, isn't it? Ned Ludd.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
So what we're saying is that quite often we have well-meaning intentions around safety, making the environment safer, but they have completely unintended consequences. And one that I think we can all understand is that piece of motorway or freeway that has such a low speed limit that you get bored. You get distracted. And I know freeways around the world have been built with curves to make sure that people are more entertained.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
When we're talking about safety, and I guess these Autoliv guys, they positioned it up like this, these little videos that, had some line by saving people's lives or by avoiding accidents, they were allowing people to live more. And the presenter, she clearly felt, there was a fairly religious zeal, I would have said, around this goal that they had, that they saved like 35,000 lives each year now, and they wanted to move to saving 100,000 lives. We didn't talk about how they calculated that. I mean, I believe it, right? This is what I mean. I don't want to seem cynical. I don't want to seem, as my son said to me the other day, "You're safety last." And no, I'm not safety last. I just feel like if you're serious about safety first, nobody would ever go out of the house. Like, if you're serious about safety first, fuck that Suburban. I want to drive a Sherman tank to drop my kid off at school, because, that way there's no way, little Precious can be hurt if there's any kind of accident. And, that sounds absurd, but that if you look at the latest highway crash statistics, the fatalities and injuries to people inside cars are consistently going down, but the fatalities and injuries to people outside of cars are going up, because cars are getting bigger and heavier and higher, and and I do think, I'm not seen any statistical evidence for this, but you may have heard on some of the pods with Mark Gammy, he has a hobby horse around the fact that people are buying cars that have Lamborghini or Ferrari performance from 10 or 15 years ago, yet now, because it's in an SUV, and they can use it for the school run, and it's an EV, they're just not used to that level of performance. And I would say I have encountered some of that out on the highway, Tesla people who are very keen to race you away from the traffic lights, and then clearly at a certain point they just get completely outside of their comfort zone because they're just not used to the performance of the vehicle that they've bought. So there is, I think, an element of that, and certainly that's not built into the statistics, and it's certainly not something that an organization like Autoliv deal with. And I should say, this engineer who presented to us, I mean, she talks about being enthusiastic about cars. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm an old man now, aren't I? And I've been steeped in this life. So if I felt like, I don't know, she just didn't come off as a car enthusiast to me. I mean, no offense, Hannah, if you're listening to the pod, but I didn't ask you about that afterwards. Maybe I should have done, but rather like the German girl working on autonomy who mentioned to me at the UI conference that she didn't really understand why German people needed to drive so fast on the Autobahn. I was like, and you're engineering the cars of the future, and you don't understand why the Germans have this passionate need to cling on to this idea of being able to drive as fast as you can go, right? And it's irrational, and it's about freedom. And Mark Gammy has a lot of jokes around freedom being spelled FREEDUMB. And I feel like one of the differences between America and Europe is America is ready to embrace more of the DUMB in order to have the DOM. Gosh, I should be a political speechwriter, shouldn't I? That was so clever, wasn't it? My word.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
So look, it's what I wrote down is that it's about freedom, it's about autonomy, it's about self-determination. It's about whether I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that, or whether you and I know I was talking about Ned Ludd earlier, but I just want to pull in another element of this simply because it is so timely, and also I want to draw a real line in the sand with it and say that just in the last couple of months, Waymo has come online properly. So these are currently Jaguar I-Paces that are very obviously autonomous. They have like a roof rack with all the NVIDIA shit in it, and they have the girl that with engineer that I saw present last night was saying 29 cameras. Apparently they have 29 pairs of eyes on the road at any one time. That was the way that she, I thought, quite hyperbolically described it. I'd rather have my eyes than But this said, right, I'd rather in my eyes than some bloody computer brain is my point when it comes to driving the car. Thank you, drive through. But, right, but not going to lie, these Waymos are really worth talking about because they can actually drive. Now, for future generations, it will seem really bizarre that there's like a seat and a steering wheel and the pedals move and the steering wheels move. It's as if the invisible man is driving. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous, right? And, you know, one of the things that we were talking about in the questions section around future passive automotive safety was as we move away from the pairs facing forward seating position, which, you know, let's call it what it really should be called, right? It's the what they used to call in the 120 years ago, the Roi de Belge, the king of the Belgian, king of Belgium's driving position, right? Because Leopold, was it been the first or the second, whichever one of those, who I read an article recently and they were like, who was a colonist? I mean, he was, right? But, you know, it's a bit like saying, you know, a weird way of positioning somebody. But anyway, whatever. Leopold, king of the Belgians, had that special raised seating position, didn't he? That Lucid sort of have a little bit as well to make you feel better sitting in the back. And certainly some SUVs have that. Those Becker limos that I went and looked at a couple of years ago, they have which is like where they convert the back of a Suburban and make it like one luxury seat that has like an elevated kind of position as well. It's kind of anyway, so it has that kind of opera seat. What the devil was I talking about with the opera seats? Oh yeah, this business of we're moving away from that, aren't we, towards what they used to call 120 years ago the vis-a-vis riding position, which is where you've like two benches facing each other so people can talk more easily, and that moves you towards that cheesy image which is always associated with cars of the future. For about 10 years ago, when I was first at Stanford, I watched, you know, an innumerable number of presentations that began with this same slide of like a 50s car driving down the road, and it's driving itself, and there's like a quintessentially 50s kind of Jetsons family who are like playing cards in this flying saucery kind of car that's driving itself down the highway. You know, in other words, this image, this cliched image, is the image which all of these engineers are secretly, you know, subconsciously working towards. Because, you know, art does inform life, right? Let's be clear. The noise that the Prius and the Teslas make now is a noise which was modeled on the noise that came from electric cars of the movies, especially Knight Rider, right? All of those whooshes and noises and all of that, right? That was all, you know, Hollywood sound people that gave the engineers a palette to design the cars with. But how do you know that, John? Sounds like bullshit. I stood around as Pixar people met engineers at open garage events at Vale, that Volkswagen Automotive Innovation Lab on the outskirts of Stanford 10 years ago, when the autonomous stuff was first coming along and cars were exciting for engineers again. When that was all happening, literally, yeah, I saw that happen. So, you know, in my own way, right, talking about this idea of freedom, and talking about, I suppose, you know, what Gami might characterize as freedom, D-U-M-B, it's more that I feel like you can justify irrational decisions on the back of how they make you feel. So, in other words, I ride motorcycles despite the danger because of the feeling of freedom that it gives me. Now, I don't need to be helmetless. So I'm not saying that I draw the line in the same place as other people draw the line. I'm just saying that you know, I'm not saying I'm oblivious to safety. I'm saying that I choose to do something. I choose to expose myself to risk for no rational reason, right? It's irrational what I'm doing. Yet after I've done it, I feel awesome. It's no different than people who need to climb It's that there's no point. You could have just driven round the other side. You could have seen the view from above. You didn't need to climb up there yourself. But it's not hard to understand why some people feel the need to climb mountains. It's in other words, exposing yourself to some danger or risk is a crucial element. Certainly in any adventure. If it's not an adventure, if there's not an element of the unexpected and probably dangerous, right? Not like life-threateningly dangerous, but an element of the unexpected, an element of the surprising that characterizes an adventure. Talked a lot in these pods about the dog and how I realized that we've had him about a year now, and what has been the rewarding element for me is that silly thing that life coaches always say, which is be outside of your comfort zone. I should just roll my eyes at that, because who wants to be outside of their comfort zone and when they're working hard every day and family and men to be doing fitness, and who wants to be outside of their comfort zone? But the reality is, unless you do that, or when you do that, the personal growth is enormous, right? And this is the experience that I've had with the dog over the last year, that because I've invested the time in him, the relationship has been, really rewarding, and I've got a lot out of it specifically because it was hard to do. If it had been easy to do, I wouldn't have got as much out of it. And again, right, just like the motorcycles, completely irrational and very similar to the motorcycles in terms of, taking me out of my comfort zone, because for the first 6 months that we had him, I hardly rode. I only rode once or twice. I was focused because, when I went out and I let the dog off the leash, I didn't know what he was going to do. I thought he'd probably listen to me. I thought he wanted to come home. I thought he wanted the treats, but, it was hit and miss at first. And we had to walk around each other and really, get a feel for what was, going to work for a child. It took a while to build simpatico, is what I'm saying. And right when I thought I got there, he hit the doggy equivalent of teenage years and then became all like, F you, I'm doing my own thing. So as part of this being outside of the comfort zone, I had life breathed into that old Honda CBR race bike that I've had for 15 years now, probably longer than that, 15, maybe closer to 20 years now. So it is a 99 CBR 600. It was converted by the first owner to be a track bike. He sold it to the guy that I bought it off. I fell off it on the test ride, and the guy I was buying it off went on to marry one of my wife's friends. So my wife's friend was like, man, Johnny's going to buy that bike, isn't he? The one he fell off. Embarrassing fall, to be honest, because the brakes were all grabby on it. And I four-fingered the brakes. I didn't two-finger the brakes. I four-fingered the brakes, and they grabbed because the bike had been sitting for a while. I didn't quite go over the handlebars, but my hand slipped off the handlebars, and I fell off, and the bike carried on without me. I remember rolling down the road and seeing the bike carrying on, standing up for a while before it fell over. I did my knee and the tip of one of my fingers. Very lucky, really, to be honest. But so I did buy the bike, and we fiddle around. We tried to do some land racing with it out in Mojave. I'll maybe even put in a picture of trying to do that. We never passed tech inspection, but it has a lot of bits and pieces that it needed for Mojave. Before I bought it, it had already had cams done. In my mind, I never rode it that much, but actually it lived in a house just in Malibu, basically. And I rode the canyon roads around Malibu with episode... I can't remember the number, the episode with the 44 as the thumbnail. Mark Newton in that episode, he lived in Topanga at that time, lived with a celebrity, believe it or not, which was really amusing. I mean, it just really, I feel like if the bike could tell stories about the things that it saw when it lived there. I mean, because literally I was there one day, right, and the doorbell rang. I was the only one person home at the house. And there's the girl stood there in a bikini, and I'm like, can I help you? And she's like, oh, I just came to see if, whatever, the celebrity is home. And I'm like, he isn't. And she went, oh, can I hang by the pool? And I'm looking at her, I'm thinking, I mean, why not? Right? Why not? So yeah, it was just one of those, like, did I just fall into an episode of The Big Lebowski? It's funny, I'd not thought about that for years and years. Yeah, so I rode that bike. Looking back, I rode the bike quite a lot, and riding it again now has reminded me of how, yeah, it has the race cam, and yeah, it has no indicators and no lights and all of that. So, it looks hardcore, but actually it has a nice riding position and a gentle clutch and Mark fitted shorty levers to it to teach me to grip properly, which I have begun to do instinctively in the years since. Could do some work with my finger work, to be honest. So that CBR lives again, right? So I threw a leg over that and was nervous to do it. And there was a whole debacle where I tried to put the wrong key in the ignition, and, because I won't bore you with the comic tragedy of me trying to get it going. Then I forgot to turn the fuel tap on, so it crapped out at the bottom of the road, and I couldn't work out how to get it going again. And then I had to push it home, and that was a nightmare of having to get, my son involved to help push the steep block home. Because so obviously I didn't need to ride that bike again. I could just sold it or got rid of it. And it's not like I've got like bad memories associated with it or anything like that. But you do have that in mind when you throw a leg over it. So again, right, it's this irrational thing. Why am I doing it? I didn't need to do that. I certainly was thinking to myself, why am I doing it when it was stuck at the bottom of the street and I was trying to figure out how I could get it home? Why? And the answer is that to be fulfilled, we look for things that are outside of our comfort zone, that are adventurous, and frequently, and they're worthwhile adventures, they have an element of danger. It's gambling, but where, it's not gambling. It's a game of skill. And certain people, I think most people, want to put something worthwhile on the line. Would motorcycling be as fulfilling if it was completely safe? I don't think it would be. Would I still want to do it? Yeah, because I feel completely safe on a pedal bike, especially when I have a helmet on. But, I don't feel like that on the highway, sitting on a motorcycle, even just riding on the highway at a sensible speed, let alone, doing what sports bikes can do.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Desire for freedom and self-determination is irrational. The best things in life, they can't be defined. They're irrational. The way you feel when you become a parent, the way you want to have a dog, even though it's loads of work and, really they just eat food and, drop hair everywhere. They're still incredibly rewarding for many, many people because of, and as I found in, as I was discussing, as I found in the last year, the best things in life, including love, they're completely irrational. Now, what's that got to do with Autoliv and safety? Well, I can't help but feel that analyzing safety, being able to say, riding a motorcycle is 32 times more dangerous than driving in a car, analyzing it just sucks all the joy out, because I'm not a statistic. I'm me. I'm hopefully a better rider than most other people. So hopefully that one in, 32 times more dangerous, hopefully that doesn't cover me. And you can say, well, John, no, you are one of the statistics. Well, actually, no, right? There are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And one of the most striking ones about motorcycle accidents in California is most motorcycle accidents, crasher, the motorcyclist, has been drinking. Not necessarily DUI, but has been drinking. And I'm like, what? Is that cliche of Harley riders going to the bar and drinking and then riding home? Is that real? And apparently the statistics seem to suggest that. If you look at the number of DWI or guys that have actually had, one beer but aren't DWI that are involved now, it's just, if statistically, if you don't drink, you make yourself about only 50% as likely to get involved in a motorcycle accident, which, just really makes you think, well, if you step away from the fact that, if you then factor in proper equipment and in terms of your equipment, your kit, and you also factor in the fact that, typically I'm riding something that can stop and turn on a dime. Whereas, I know from riding this Honda Shadow, Harleys bloody can't, right? Altogether, I feel like, you're significantly altering the statistics such that 3 times, 32 times more dangerous than a car or whatever statistic the California Driver's Handbook loves to have. It's meaningless. That's the point. So the statistics, they suck all the joy out of it. The analyzing, the rationalizing, it sucks the joy out of something that should be poetic and should be about freedom, DOM.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
And I think for people in the 20th century, especially Americans, driving was about being independent, being free. It represented that, and as driving has become less free, correspondingly, young people have become far less interested in wanting to actually drive. Because, why would you want to drive if it didn't actually deliver you anything other than, getting you from one place to another, and you could have a friend or a parent or an Uber do that. If it's just the A to B, if it's not or if you can get that feeling of freedom and independence without actually needing to sit behind the wheel and pass the driving test, that's how you're going to do it.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
So all that wasn't terribly coherent, was it? I probably should have composed my ideas better before I sat down and put together that digression. But I think if I was to try and sum it up, I would say that when you remove the danger, you remove the sense of adventure. And when you remove the sense of adventure, you remove the joy and the independence and the freedom. I am happy to accept an element of danger in order to retain a level of freedom. And I'm deeply uncomfortable with this headlong rush towards safety because it's unfree. And we need to recognize that there is that basic antagonism there. And, I don't need to be wanting to ride down a freeway in Atlanta on a Hayabusa splitting lanes wearing, flip-flops and sunglasses. I don't need to be that guy. And I understand why that would maybe encourage people to want to legislate. But at the same time, if we provide the right level of education, it should be up to that individual to do that if he wants to. So after the usual digression, which is longer than the actual presentation itself, let me begin with Autoliv and the future of automotive safety. So I mentioned Sven Beeker earlier, who hosted the event. He talked a little bit about his role as SAE local rep. He talked about how the Society of Automotive Engineers, why do we exist? What do we do? He talked about standardization being an important element of what they do. He did talk about other things as well, but standardization is the thing that I wrote down. And I just think that on the face of it, that's glib. But if you think about standardization and what it did for the automobile, that without standardization, there was no mass production. And if we think about, one of the things that struck me about the LiDAR presentation was that each one of the LiDAR makers has their own protocol. And so therefore, the one that we saw, they're in bed with Volkswagen and Audi. Their devices can't talk to BMW or Audi brains because they speak a different protocol. And similarly, the BMW LiDAR maker has a protocol which only works with BMWs, not with Audis or so that kind of lack of standards, which, the Valeo guy was like, whatever it is, what it is, which I remember I used to feel like that when I used to start that kind of tech myself. That is something which a body like an industry body really can have a huge, it can make life a lot easier and make the technology move a lot faster if standards can be established. So I thought that was interesting. And he also talked about sort of 3 E's, which is that the SAE community is these 3 E's: engineers, entrepreneurs, and enthusiasts, and that everybody in the room was probably more than one of those things, but certainly would be one of those things. I feel like I'm only really the third. The presenter was a lady called Hannah Carlson. She introduced herself as a development lead, and I guess she's in Stanford as part of this Combient Foundry exchange program. You can tell I don't know what I'm talking about because I put the thing in quotes, and you can tell I'm reading it off the page, can't you? But basically, it's saying how can this company Autoliv leverage the Valley. That was really why she's here. And this Combient Foundry is like a work exchange thing, kind of not dissimilar to that Bunac thing that brought me to work at that theme park all those years ago in it would have been 1996, no, 1995. So Autoliv, 14 bases around the world, global development centers. Hannah was an airbag engineer straight out of college, then a project manager, now a project lead. 33% of all car safety systems in the world around us are Autoliv. And 35,000 lives saved annually, and this statistic was repeated. And the goal is to make that 100,000 lives. This is their life-saving mission, as I wrote down. I guess I'm always doubtful about moralizing. I mean, it's an unworthy goal, isn't it? I just love the machines the way that they have been. Any changes you make to them are going to make them worse, can't you see? That's sort of how I feel about it. We're like, we all need to skill up. Let's all skill up. Let's all get better than we are, and then fewer of us will be killed on the road. That's the way that I feel. I feel that, I'm about active safety, training better, than I'm about passive safety. When you crash, there's an airbag to cover your stupid ass. That's my perspective. Company's 70 years old, believe it or not. Always a focus on auto safety. There's a little video on YouTube. I may even do a link to it that they showed, which, is like a warm feel about who we are, which is pretty cool, actually. They started out with the old lap straps. I wonder if the old lap straps in my 63 Pontiac Grand Prix are that. And then 3 points, then airbags. And the levels that she talked about was after that. There's seatbelt pretensioners and then side airbags and all of that, which, if I guess subconsciously I'd seen that stuff come in with cars over the years. But, it's quite shocking now when you get in an 80s car and you realize how tinny they are. They didn't seem that way, in the 80s. They were fiddling around with autonomous cars in the 90s from a safety perspective that, if the computers do it, we humans can't make mistakes. I'm sorry, I can't let you do that, Dave. 50% market share in the US and the EU, 10% market share from each of the major OEMs. So I think Nissan was 12 or 15%, and some of the others were less, but there was most makers seem to be knocking around the 10% kind of mark. So they had a really diverse revenue. Stellantis can go bust and they'll still be all right. That was the message that I took away from that. 45% of their revenue comes from airbags. They're working with Rivian and Lucid. It's hard to get into the Chinese market, and of course, the Chinese market, they use domestic suppliers. I thought it was quite interesting that she talked about how steer-by-wire was forcing them to innovate, because so much of their airbag technology is triggered around, when the steering rack, when the car senses the steering rack moving, that triggers the airbag to fire. Because if the steering rack's moving, because the front of the car's folding up because it's hit something, that was what was. It wasn't immediately clear to me that that's what she meant, but this is because later on they were saying that if the car's got a hit at the front, they've got 45 milliseconds to inflate the airbag, whereas if the car's hit at the side, they've only got 10 seconds to get the airbag inflated. I was like, ooh, the deadly door hit. We talked about those before, haven't we? We always pay tribute to Keith Odor when we think about the door hit, but Mike Hawthorne was another door hit guy, wasn't he? JD McGuffey, I think, the NASCAR guy, is another door hit. Oh, so they're looking for more market share. It used to be that, basically they've put as many airbags as they can in cars, and now they're looking at other things. So they're looking at trucks, airbags in trucks. You're like, what? Well, a lot of rollover accidents in big rigs are fatal, apparently, according to their video. So now, they're going to airbag it up the wazoo, and it's not going to be fatal anymore when you roll your 18-wheeler, apparently. But I was most interested in the stuff they had at EICMA, which they've only just launched. EICMA is the big bike show, and they've got airbags in the bike. I'll post a picture in the thing, but basically an airbag coming out of where the instruments and the headstock would be. So instead of head banging, that I don't know, don't you come off the bike? That was pretty weird to me that you would have an airbag on the bike. But the other thing that they did that was very different from the D&Easy things is that they had, the D&Easy airbags are like collars, which are mostly about protecting you from the high side. That was my understanding of it. I might be wrong. The ones that they had were sort of these vest thorax protector kind of ones that inflated, but I might try and get hold of one of these to test. They were at EICMA, so they're not out yet, but I really might actually try and sample one of those. I said, obviously you don't want to tempt fate too much with testing it, do you? You don't want to test it fully. You just want to see what it would be like in daily use. You trust that the key functionality would work, wouldn't you? I guess the point that she made about the motorcycles was less of an issue. India and Asia were the markets she talked about for that. She also amused me by talking about bikes as two-wheelers all the time. But again, right, what we're saying is that it's, she's not just, because that includes these high-speed scooters that are around at the moment, right? And you're like, airbags on a scooter, well, it seems absurd to me, but these guys have probably thought of that. Oh, another thing that I didn't know about was airbags in the cowl. So apparently Volvo have started putting pedestrian airbags in the cowl. So if you run somebody over, or if somebody crashes their moped or scooter into like the front or side, or along the scuttle, along the bottom of the windshield, instead of cowl induction, there's like a big air curtain airbag that like pops out to protect the hapless individual flying over the hood. I'm reminded of one time when I was distraught over unrequited love and wasn't thinking clearly. And this was Leeds years ago. I was 18, 19. And I stepped out into the road without looking properly. And a guy hit me and scooped me up on the hood of the car. It was a Citroen BX. I remember, a grey one. Well, my elbow, he hit me like behind my right knee and had me right off my feet. And I remember my elbow going into the hood of the car and denting it. And then I remember looking him in the eye as I like rolled up the hood. And then he had the brakes on, obviously. So I then slid off the hood and onto the floor. He was a nice guy. He was desperate to take me to the hospital and all that. And all I could think about was getting away as quickly as possible, because I knew I'd fucked up the hood of his car. I knew how pissed off my dad would be if it was his car. I hadn't thought about that for years and years. So I guess I talked about measuring the steering rack moving, right? To know they have a variety of pressure sensors around that they use to detect an abnormality, which then triggers the airbag. And the way that it works at the moment is that the abnormality is signaled. In other words, the B pillar is now close. The B pillar on the left is now closer to the B pillar on the right. Could be that, you've spun the car off the road and hit a tree, right? So it sends a signal to the ECU. B pillar's moved. B pillar is moving, trigger airbag. So now in 10 milliseconds, the airbag increases, the airbag triggers, and you don't get crushed by the B pillar, in theory. And this was really set me thinking about the freedom thing. Some US states do not mandate seatbelt wearing. And clearly, Hannah, who's Swedish, was pretty incredulous that was the case. And the way that she framed it was that she said that we have to design for free flying objects in the cabin. And I guess that's that whole, she was coming from a place just like me where I was like, I couldn't understand why anyone would ever ride without a helmet. Why would you ever drive without a seatbelt on? Well, those states, there are some very long, empty roads, and people like to be comfortable. Seems perfectly rational not to mandate that you have to put a seatbelt on like some draconian big brother. Why would you pass that law? People put the seatbelt on if they want, and don't if they don't want. Everyone knows it makes you safer if you put it on. Well, but do they know how much safer and unsafer it makes them? I don't know. You suck all the joy out of it if you tell people, if you educate people. If you tell people how many people get hurt riding motorcycles, nobody would ever ride. Does that make it less joyful? Does it make it not worthwhile to do? No, I don't know. If you showed people videos of people falling off mountains, would anybody want a mountain climb? I don't know. Let people be people. Don't preach. Madonna wrote a song about that, didn't she? They had this interesting way of measuring how safety worked. They said that wearing a lap strap was like 20% effective, and a 3-point belt made it 50% effective, and a 3-point belt with a pretensioner 55% effective, and a driver airbag made you 60 to 70%. But if you only had the driver airbag, in those states in America with the free flying objects, that only gives you about the 20%. So in other words, an airbag and a lap strap, they're about as good as each other, apparently. She had a slide where you could see the inside of steering wheel covers, and she was talking about the design of them, because obviously the way that they split, the speed that they split, and the fact that they split in a way that doesn't cut the airbag material, but at the same time, the part is durable and doesn't stain, and, can act as the steering wheel for the car's life, should it not be needed. We talked about the design of that quite carefully, and that, I guess that was quite interesting to me. The airbag itself is two pieces of nylon stitched together, and they're about 45 to 60 litres of air. The design of them has barely changed, since they were first thought about 50 years ago. The inflators can be one stage or two stage, because there's a whole shtick where if you've got a short person who's sat real close to the steering wheel, you don't want to deploy with full force. Whereas if you've some big fat bastard who's sat miles away from the steering wheel, you need to deploy with full force because, he's coming forward with a lot more force than, the 100-pound person who's sat real close to the steering wheel. So she talked about how those inflators can be one stage or two stage, to control that. And she also talked about how the seatbelt pre-tensioning used in coordination with the airbags can have a real impact. With the airbag, with the speed of airbag deployment, can have a real impact on making sure that you're able to keep people safe. Talked about how airbag sensor technology has improved a lot since the 70s, although, as I mentioned, the bag itself is pretty similar. How fast is 45 milliseconds? Well, they have film of like an airbag deploying and somebody blinking, and the blink is just so slow in comparison. It's that fast. I was talking about the vis-a-vis seating position. Zoox, who are employing this vis-a-vis seating position in their test vehicles, they call it a fireside seating position. I just love it, don't you? You just love marketing bullshit. So for the futures, this is the bit that I was really interested in. This is the bit where I sharpen my pencil properly. They see the AECS megatrends. This was how they positioned it. So trend A is autonomy. And so the way that they'd done it was they talked about the trend, and then they married the trend with opportunity for Autoliv or Autoliv, or however you want to pronounce it. So it's driver. So for autonomy, right, it's driver protection, it's occupant protection, and it's dealing with new flexible seating positions. In other words, people are going to recline. How do we make that safe? People are going to be reclining and sleeping because the car's going to be driving itself. How do we make that safe? The E mega trend was electrification, and not just, these first gen EVs that we've got at the moment, steer by wire, new generation Chinese EVs, making sure that as the new Chinese EVs, which are going to iterate very, very quickly, making sure that they have offerings which are iterating and competitive with this whole new manufacturing paradigm, which the Chinese are going to bring to EV manufacture. And what they call E to E services. So I don't know what that means. C was connectivity, which is, over-the-air updates and combating hacking. And apparently they've been working on that already. She talked quite a lot about the combating of hacking. I mean, you just find yourself thinking, why are we having these autonomous cars if they have all of these risks? Why are we? But, that's, again, I'm there with Ned Ludd smashing the machines, aren't I? And then the S element, they called software-defined vehicles. And this is what, for them, this is the development of an automotive specific operating system. So I suppose this is, thinking about cars more fully as mobile computers, and thinking about what they might be able to do to, fit in that space. And what they've talked about here is an automotive operating system. So the feeling was that this was the sort of grand overarching strategy, but there wasn't going to be a divergence from the simple real life safety focus that the company has always been known for. And she then talked about how fatality numbers have flatlined since about 2010, and how we're still in a place where a low or medium speed prang can prove fatal or injurious, not just high speed ones. On the face of it's obvious, but then as you stop and think about it a little more, if we're able, protecting somebody in a 130 mile an hour wreck is going to be hard. Protecting somebody in a 70 mile an hour wreck is going to be hard. But protecting somebody who's being injured or worse in a 30 or 40 mile an hour wreck, that seems like something we could really work on. And that was what she was talking about. And a lot of this part of the presentation, it was clear that so much of what they do is blocking and tackling around things like seatbelt positioning. And she talked about how with pedestrians, the way that we're able to design the shape of cars' noses now, and how there's those rules around making sure that the engine isn't right up under the hood, because it used to be that if you fell on the hood immediately bent around the engine and you were basically falling right onto the engine block. So that was going to be bad for you. Cars recently have been designed around that, and she feels like there's a long way we can go in terms of simple everyday kind of not dramatic but blocking and tackling kind of solutions to manage that. So one of the things that she talked about was using AI to, a lot of the tests that they have at the moment are very rigid, 45 miles an hour into a stationary object, 45 miles an hour into an offset object, those kind of standardized kind of, well, what if AI could provide useful modeling and data, because they could do because the AI can do many different speeds and many different angles of incidence and hardness or softness of obstacle. You can work out a million more scenarios, which are going to allow us a million ways to just make things incrementally safer, just to make sure that everyone's like me wearing a helmet with a chin visor if we're going to do the dangerous business of getting in the car at all. I forgot to mention they did test dummies as well. They developed the standardized test dummies. And of course, the test dummy being a standardized size, that's another way in which their standardized testings, they're good, but AI gives us scope to just do so much better, because AI can test around different sizes and weights and shapes of people. I know what I was going to say. The other thing that's really interesting is, at the moment, the airbag technology, the decision whether or not to deploy, is based on predominantly in-cabin monitors. So things like, is the steering rack moving? Is the B pillar moving, as we talked about? But they're also been doing things like using the cameras that have been focused on people, so they can see what the people are doing as well, to try and take that into account around their decision making. Now, the other thing that they were saying it would be great if we could do was if we could see what was going on outside of the car as well, not just the internals of the car, if we could see what was going outside of the car. Because if we can see that there's we're right up the jacksie of an 18-wheeler, we know that we're in the middle of an accident, so we're going to need to deploy the airbag. Whereas, if we can see all around the car and see that there's no obstacles, we know that, there's no other vehicles, or, we've not crashed into a tree or off the road, we know that we don't need to deploy the airbag. So, in other words, they see that they would like to tap into the additional data sources which autonomous vehicles have. And when they tap into the additional data sources that autonomous vehicles have, they feel like they're going to be able to make even better decisions about when and where and how to deploy airbags. She did go as far as to say that the Autoliv were almost at a crossroads at the moment, and they needed to take this step away from the passive systems of the airbag triggering and move towards technologies that had these sensor inputs included. The system that we talked about earlier that they're at EICMA showing at the moment, this was going to be potentially driven from the bike's ECU, not like the D&Easy suits that I knew, where, when there's like a bungee, you're attached to the bike with a bungee, and when you separate from the bike, it pulls the bungee out and that triggers the airbag, which always made me think like you'd like get off the bike and go for a pee at the end of your track day session, forget and accidentally trigger the airbag and destroy your leather jacket. That was what I had envisaged happening. there was some discussion around whether or not there was an application around protecting old people from falling. In other words, somebody who's prone to falling and is elderly and frail, they might be wearing one of these, motorcycle vest affairs. So when they fall, they, just like a falling motorcyclist, they're protected by the airbag. It sounds absurd. And then you stop and think about it and you're like, actually, if it works, if they can inflate in 10 milliseconds and it can protect you in a car crash, why couldn't it protect some old biddy who's accidentally slipped down the stairs and he's going to be immobile and, because often for old people, that kind of immobility is life ending, isn't it? So, it makes them feel like it's it breaks their spirit. So if you can, it's really an active way. And this does speak to what, Hannah, the presenter, was talking about all the way through, which is this idea that it's longer lives. It's longer lives, but it's more enjoyable lives. It's improving, it's keeping people alive, and it's improving the quality of their lives as well. And it was all around a very, warm, tree hugging kind of mission, which is unusual for automotive engineering, isn't it?
This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.